This is my new family. We're getting a divorce.
After 5 years of working away from home, my husband Michael returned and suddenly flaunted his mistress and a child he had kept hidden, proudly proclaiming,
These two are competent, unlike you guys. So take Daniel and leave quickly.
"Unbelievable! What do you mean by this?" Shocked by his audacity, I moved to confront Michael, but my son Daniel gently grasped my right hand. Startled, I turned to look at Daniel, who nodded solemnly and protectively stepped in front of me. Then he stared intently at Michael and quietly said,
Really, Dad? Don't you know about this?
Michael was speechless as he looked at what Daniel was holding in his right hand.
This? No way, because you're supposed to.
Seeing Michael flustered by the unexpected revelation, I smirked inwardly. Yes, Michael had been indifferent to us for these past 5 years. No, ever since we got married, he had continuously neglected me. So now he is yet to learn about the life we've been leading. Michael had been deceiving us and living however he wanted all this time. The time had come for such a selfish man to pay his dues. Serves him right. Deep down, I thought to myself. I was about to hit Michael with yet another truth. My name is Ashley, and I'm a 38-year-old part-time working housewife. I live with my 14-year-old son, Daniel, and my mother-in-law, Jessica, who works part-time. My husband, Michael, has been on a work assignment away from home for the past 5 years. Jessica, who lost her husband 10 years ago, lives with us. Many people think living with my mother-in-law, Jessica, must be uncomfortable, but that's not true. Our family has never had the typical mother-in-law and daughter-in-law problems. The reason is that Jessica is very friendly and straightforward, and we can talk about anything with each other. Of course, when we first got married, we were awkward and couldn't express our thoughts to each other. However, a particular incident brought us much closer together. The issue was about Daniel. The fact is, from a young age, Daniel was a bit different from other children. Daniel is passionate about what he is interested in and wants to do only that. He wants to know what he wants to understand, to make me ask a lot of questions. And in any case, he focuses on one thing until he is satisfied with it. While Daniel's strong preferences constantly threw me off, I thought they were expected and raised him accordingly. However, problems emerged when we enrolled Daniel in kindergarten. Initially, I planned to stay home and focus on raising Daniel until he was a bit older. However, Michael had a different opinion. He wanted to give Daniel an advanced education.
Nowadays, it is called preschool education, and it is basic to provide education before entering elementary school. We need to make sure Daniel studies hard now to earn money in the future.
And then, Michael forced study on Daniel, who wasn't even a year old yet. It was essential to develop a child's abilities from a young age, and at first I didn't particularly oppose Michael because his point made sense to me. But then, Michael's actions began to escalate. Getting out of control, Michael kept buying expensive educational materials and toys for young children. Gradually, this began to strain our finances. On top of that, Michael even suggested putting Daniel in a preschool program. At that point, I really started to think it was too much. Hey, please, I want to raise Daniel at home until he turns 3. And where are we supposed to get the money for preschool? To my pleading, Michael snorted and retorted.
That's your job to figure out.
As I wondered what to do, changes began to occur in 1-year-old Daniel's body and mind. Daniel, who had been relatively calm and seldom cried at night, began to cry intensely all the time. This was because Michael, with his unusual zeal, was forcing Daniel to learn from educational materials daily, often shouting at him. Before this, Daniel was interested in various things and would listen intently to the storybooks I read. But from that day on, it was as if Daniel had regressed to a baby, wailing every day. Seeing this, Michael looked embarrassed. "I'd like us to leave Daniel alone for a while," I pleaded with Michael. From then until he turned 3, I took my time to raise Daniel at home. Initially, Daniel preferred quiet activities like reading books or drawing over physical ones. He seemed to enjoy activities requiring skill, like origami and coloring. If left alone, Daniel could immerse himself in such activities for hours. This was fine at home, but problems became apparent when he started kindergarten. Daniel, who preferred being alone, didn't fit in well at kindergarten. Moreover, he needed help with group activities and making friends. Additionally, he showed little interest in the kindergarten curriculum. Due to this lack of cooperation, the kindergarten teachers suspected he might have a developmental disorder. When the kindergarten called me in individually, the teacher recommended that I consult a specialist. However, when I discussed this with Michael, he raged.
Why can't he study like other kids? It's embarrassing, and I can't tell anyone.
"Don't talk like that. Kids aren't ornaments for their parents, you know? Daniel is our precious only son."
Developmental disorder. This wasn't supposed to happen. Anyway, you handle Daniel's situation.
Michael shouted these words at me. But thinking about Daniel, I couldn't just let things be. I went back to the kindergarten teacher for advice. Fortunately, the kindergarten Daniel attended was knowledgeable about developmental disorders and could refer us to a specialist. When I told Michael again, he became even angrier.
Taking him to the hospital? How embarrassing. Absolutely do not take him there.
Moreover, when Michael's father, Richard, heard about Daniel from Michael, he vehemently criticized the decision to go to the hospital.
Michael has really been saddled with a burden. It's so embarrassing, I can hardly walk outside.
Blamed by Michael and Richard, I was at a loss. At that time, Jessica was the one who understood and supported me.
Every child naturally has their own personality, so don't worry about what others say.
Jessica smiled gently.
Besides, Daniel is growing up to be very kind. That's enough for me.
And she gently stroked Daniel's head. From then on, Jessica shielded me from Richard and Michael's sarcasm and abuse. However, despite dodging their harsh scrutiny, I could not take Daniel to the hospital. Richard, like Michael, cared a lot about appearances and was an even bigger spendthrift than Michael. Jessica didn't talk much about it, but it seemed she had lived through some tough times. That's why Jessica continues to work part-time. Jessica and I helped each other out, trying to get through the tough times together. A few years later, Richard suddenly passed away. The bereaved Jessica then quietly approached me about the debt Richard had left behind. Indeed, Jessica had been shouldering the burden of Richard's debts alone. But Jessica hadn't told Michael about Richard's debts for some reason. "Hey Jessica, why don't you move in with us? You can't possibly pay off Richard's debts on your own." When I bravely suggested this, Jessica accepted it, albeit hesitantly. And without telling Michael about Richard's debts, we all started living together. Michael was thrilled when I proposed living with Jessica, far from opposing it. He cheerfully told me,
For someone who can't even raise a child properly, you've come up with a pretty smart idea. Do your best to make mom's life easier.
Jessica frowned upon hearing his words. Jessica seemed about to say something, so I gave her a subtle nod. Seeing that, she faintly nodded. And so we began living together. A few years later, when Daniel was 9, Michael was assigned to work alone far from home, and I ended up living with Jessica and Daniel, just the three of us. However, with Michael gone, life became much more comfortable. After all, he would start yelling or treating him harshly whenever Michael saw Daniel, because he was irritated that Daniel seemed to be worse at his studies than average children.
Why can't you be like other kids?
Michael would shout such things whenever he watched Daniel studying. Neither Jessica nor I could stop him, he didn't care. Daniel always seemed to shrink in fear whenever Michael was around. We felt so sorry for Daniel. But as long as Michael was there, we could do nothing to rescue him. Daniel still had difficulty fitting in at elementary school and couldn't go on some days. At such times, I would secretly let Daniel stay home and let him do whatever he wanted all day under my supervision. With Michael away, we were freed from those constrained days and quickly took Daniel to a specialist for an evaluation. The results revealed something surprising about Daniel. This fact may serve as a chance to improve the relationship between Daniel and Michael. I tried calling Michael's cell phone several times to report about Daniel, but I couldn't reach him, and he never called back. Jessica was utterly exasperated by the situation.
What is Michael thinking, really?
Jessica said with a sigh, and I replied with a sense of resignation. Indeed. I sighed to myself too. Can we really call ourselves a family in this situation? Since Michael left for his solo assignment, he's only provided the bare minimum for living expenses. I've been working full-time since I started living with Jessica, and even at her advanced age, Jessica is still working part-time. We can't say our lives are affluent, but we have just enough income to live without discomfort. Additionally, a significant change had come for the three of us. This had further distanced us from Michael's presence. Then, one day in the 5th year after Michael started his solo assignment, he suddenly returned home, ending his assignment, and brought back a young woman and a child. Jessica and I looked at each other. And then Michael turned to me and announced something outrageous.
This is my new family. I'm divorcing you.
And for some reason, he proudly showed them off.
This is my mistress, Laura, who is 24 years old, and my illegitimate daughter, Sarah, who is 4. These two are very talented, unlike you guys. They are the perfect family for me. So you take Daniel and get the hell out of my house.
Unbelievable. What do you mean by this? Shocked by his words, I moved to confront Michael, but Daniel gently grasped my right hand. When I looked at him in surprise, he nodded firmly and protectively stepped in front of me. Looking directly at Michael, he quietly declared.
The ones leaving should be you, Dad.
Michael, furious at Daniel's words, advanced on him as if he was about to grab him.
Who do you think is supporting you guys? You couldn't survive without me.
Daniel, undeterred by Michael's loud insults, quietly responded.
Really? Dad, didn't you know this?
As Daniel slowly extended his right hand and held something, Michael was speechless.
This is.
Watching Michael flustered, I smirked inwardly. For these past 5 years, Michael has been disinterested in us. That's why he doesn't know what kind of life we've been leading now. Michael has been deceiving us and living however he wanted. Finally, the time has come for him to face the consequences of his selfishness.
What's this? Some toy?
I coldly interrupted him. That's not a toy. It's a real ring that Daniel made. Yes, in fact, Daniel was not developmentally disabled, but was a gifted child with high abilities. Daniel had an exceptionally high artistic sense and had been flourishing as an accessory designer. Over the past 5 years, Daniel fully developed his talent, something that became possible only after Michael, who used to verbally abuse him, was no longer around. Right now, the accessories designed by Daniel are booked months in advance. Thanks to that, Jessica and I have led a stable life. Facing a bewildered Michael, I revealed more truths. Also, this house is in my name, so you have no right to tell me to leave. Indeed, when Richard passed away, Jessica consulted me about the debt, and she transferred the house to my name to avoid burdening me.
That's ridiculous. I'm her real son. Why would she give the house to him?
After silently observing everything, Jessica finally spoke up and reprimanded Michael.
Michael, enough is enough. You really are just like Richard. Truly a disgrace.
Jessica glared at Michael sharply. Tears were faintly visible in her eyes.
All you've done is live as you please, neglecting your only wife and child. I've been embarrassed by you all this time. Still, I believed in you. I hoped that one day you would wake up.
Jessica bit her lip hard, then turned her eyes away from Michael. Without looking at him again, she muttered softly.
Michael, I'm disowning you. We are no longer mother and son, just strangers.
Thinking about Jessica's feelings, I felt unbearable sadness. What must it have been like for her to disown her only son? We can live without you. You should leave our house, I told Michael coldly. Just then, Laura, quiet until now, suddenly started screaming loudly.
Unbelievable. I followed you here because you said we'd get a house. What are we supposed to do now?
Facing Laura's vulgar tirade, Michael shouted back.
Shut up. If Daniel, who's developmentally disabled, can do it, Sarah can do it too.
Michael clearly needed to understand our explanations. He was still calling Daniel developmentally disabled. Honestly, he was a father unworthy of the title.
We're better than you, Michael boasted arrogantly.
Jessica, Daniel, and I all glared at him with cold eyes. Anyway, you're no longer family to us, and this is my house, so please leave quickly. Daniel pushed Michael and his group out of the house when I said this. Daniel's back had grown much more significant as he forcefully expelled them than I had realized. 3 years had passed since then. Since then, the three of us had been living peacefully, but eventually Jessica passed away. At Jessica's funeral, I was immersed in various memories. I wonder if Jessica lived happily, even a little in the end. My heart was overwhelmed with sadness. However, the somber atmosphere of the venue was broken when suddenly the entrance to the funeral home became noisy. A loud voice was shouting. As I hurried to the entrance, I recognized the familiar voice. Michael, Laura, and Sarah stood in tattered clothes and disheveled appearances. Surprised by my presence, Michael began to yell at me.
Hey, there's an inheritance from Mom, right? I'm her son. I should have a rightful share.
Michael started ranting about things I hadn't even mentioned as he yelled at me. After that, Michael spent all his savings on various classes for Sarah, thinking she had some hidden talent. But it turned out that Sarah had no unique talents, the money was just wasted.
We drew a losing ticket. Thanks to that, our debt has skyrocketed.
Then Michael glared sharply at Sarah standing behind him. Startled, Sarah shivered and whispered in a voice close to tears.
I'm sorry.
Seeing her like that, I felt something was off. Sarah was supposed to be about 7 years old, but looked as thin as a withered tree and seemed constantly terrified, always flinching. You haven't been doing terrible things to this child, have you? As I glared and spoke, Michael retorted dismissively.
I've given her so much attention, yet it's Sarah's fault for being mediocre.
That's right. She's the one holding us back.
At their fierce words, Sarah flinched again and curled up. From their behavior, it was clear they were likely physically abusive towards Sarah regularly. While staring at Laura, Michael began to say even more awful things.
Well, that will all be resolved when the second child inside her is born.
The next child will definitely be born with a special talent.
I felt sick to my stomach beyond mere disgust at their vile conversation. It was clear that leaving Sarah with them would lead to nothing good. What should I do? As I pondered, Michael made an outrageous proposal.
If you're so concerned about Sarah, I'll give her to you. In exchange, give me Mom's inheritance.
All right, I'll take Sarah and renounce any inheritance. I had a plan in mind and pretended to agree with Michael's terms without saying anything. Above all, I couldn't bear to see Michael and Laura use Sarah as a punching bag. Seeing Sarah watch her parents' faces anxiously reminded me painfully of Daniel in the past. After going through various procedures, I officially adopted Sarah as my foster child. At first, Sarah was quite frightened of us, but as we persistently interacted with her, she gradually warmed up to us. Daniel, perhaps seeing his younger self in her, unusually took great care of her from the beginning despite his shyness. Thanks to Daniel's kindness, Sarah gradually opened up to us. The three of us started a strange yet somehow comfortable life together. Then, 3 months later, we got constant calls from Michael and Laura. Reluctantly answering the phone due to the noise, Michael screamed at me.
Hey you, what is this about? Why is Mom's inheritance just debt?
Indeed, Jessica had no inheritance. There was only the debt left by Richard. I had planned to renounce the inheritance from the beginning. This was something Jessica had told me about during her lifetime.
Make sure to renounce the inheritance when I'm gone.
Jessica had stressed this point. Michael, of course, did not know this and had accepted the inheritance, including the so-called negative legacy, simply by accepting it. It was too late to renounce the inheritance when he realized it. All that was left was the increased debt. Jessica's silence towards Michael was probably her final way of disciplining him. That's quite a harsh lesson. From the other end of the phone, I could hear Michael and Laura's panicked voices.
Hey, what's going on? Why is there no house?
At that, I couldn't help but smirk a little. I had long planned to relocate overseas with the children to a country that is more understanding of disabilities. Now that Jessica was gone, there was no reason to stay in America anymore. So I had sold the house that Jessica had transferred to me. The call from Michael came while I was on my way to the airport. I had nothing left to say to them. Ignoring Michael and Laura's cries, I hung up my phone, boarded the plane with Daniel and the others, and set off for a new life. A year later, we returned to America for a visit. According to relatives we met, Michael and Laura had disappeared after their debts mounted. I'm so glad I decided to take Sarah in then. Daniel's designs have gained high acclaim and popularity overseas. He is now a widely recognized and successful jewelry designer. His number of good friends around him has increased as well. Sarah now looks up to me as if I were her natural parent and gets along well with her half-brother. She is thoroughly enjoying life abroad. Though ours may be an unconventional family, I am delighted at heart